Hello and welcome to yet another episode of TesterSpeak special feature. My guest today is somebody whom I met uh, a few years ago on LinkedIn, and this was during one of my posts where he responded, and then we got connected, and then we started following each other and each other's work, and I realized that he has a lot of wisdom to share. And my belief became stronger when we both did a rapid software testing managed class together. We were both students in that class, in the same class. And I got to learn a lot of things from him, from his vision. And my belief of him being inspired in a lot of ways became stronger. Also, he is an active member of the test chat community with a lot of wisdom to share. So without any further delay, I would like to welcome my guest today, Matthew Middleton. Welcome, Matthew.
Hi, Brijesh. Thanks for having me on.
You're most welcome. I'm so glad you could give me some time. I know you've been very busy lately.
Yeah, I'm run off my feet most days.
So how are things at your end with the whole pandemic situation? Are things under control? Things.
So locally, so I live in Newfoundland and Labrador, which is a province in Canada, and our province has done extremely well. We have been very fortunate. Our Minister of Health is a physician, and our Chief Medical Officer of Health is also a physician. So they've been able to give really good direction. There've been a few missteps, but by and large, it's been extremely good. They locked things down really early on, and because we're an island, or at least the Newfoundland part of it is an island, so it's a lot easier for us to control travel. So they've put in a pretty strict control on travel, and that has made a huge difference. We haven't had a community outbreak. I think it's been since at least May. The only cases that we've had have been either travel based, like somebody coming in from out of town who, we have a lot of people who work in other provinces and come home and live here. And most of the cases that we've had in the last few months have been either people coming back to the province or people who have been exposed to that person directly. They're usually family members or friends, so they're very close to that person already. So there hasn't really been any community spread. So that's been really good. So we're actually just about to kick off the school year tomorrow. So that should be interesting.
Well, great. Well, so I live in the Netherlands, and in the Netherlands, they took a different approach compared to a lot of other countries in the world. What we had here was what they called as an intelligent lockdown, not a complete lockdown. So, supermarkets were still open. We were still allowed to go, of course, with the social distancing rules. Surprisingly, the mouth masks were not mandatory, but they were advised. People were advised to have them on, and most people chose to do so. So, things came under control. And on the 11th of May, the government announced that they would like to start the schools and the daycare centers open. The first age group to get back to a normal routine was the 0 to 12 years age group because of two reasons. One is because they were locked down inside the house for like 2 months already, and that was affecting them mentally. So more than physical health, the mental health is also important. And you would want to help kids to enjoy and things like that. So daycare centers were back open, and that's how it started. And then the school year began, a little later with 50% attendance or capacity, and that's how they began, and they've been doing pretty well. Unfortunately, we went into a vacation season in July, August, and a lot of people went out and they went to what were previously the hotspots like, Spain, France and Italy and all those places. And now we are seeing a sort of a second spike, but I think we should be able to manage it. That's what I feel. Now, apart from the pandemic situation, I have noticed something with the time zone in which you live. Okay, so
Yes.
your time zone has a 30 minutes offset compared to
Yes.
the remaining time zones in the world.
Yep.
And sorry, go ahead.
It's an
You wanted to say
interesting
something?
thing. Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I did a little digging, and I think there are 5 or 6 time zones globally that do a 30-minute offset. Um,
Yes.
and actually, fun fact about Newfoundland, it's one of the very few jurisdictions globally that has ever done double daylight savings time, which is like they
Oh,
basically had daylight savings time in the window that everybody else in Canada was using, but then they had another bracket on the outside of that where they adjusted by
oh,
another hour, and it didn't last very long. I wasn't living in Newfoundland at the time, so I didn't experience this particular event, but I've been told by people who were here that it was weird.
I can imagine that, and the reason why I brought that is because I'm sure a lot of the viewers would be uh, surprised to know that India is also one of the countries with a 30 minutes offset. Okay, so
Yes.
it is Afghanistan. I think some of the countries in the Asian region, especially, they have
Yeah,
only
South
30 minutes off.
Pacific.
And when you suggested time for this meeting, and I noticed,
Yeah.
oh wow, that's another 30 minutes offset, and this happens to be an island. So I was I was curious. I was curious that how do you manage a 30 minutes offset being a part of a country, and then so yeah.
It's a really it was so our national broadcaster growing up it was always 6:30 or the show will be on at 6 o'clock 7:30 in Newfoundland. But interestingly, not all of the province is actually on that time zone. The island and most of Labrador is on that time zone, but part of Labrador is actually on the Atlantic time zone, which is a standard 1 hour offset instead of a half hour.
Yeah. Well, okay. So that is quite an interesting trivia for the audience.
Yep.
I'm sure I'll be able to ask people a lot of questions if they are paying attention to what we are talking about. So I could probably
If you
I
want me
could
to
do
drop
a
some
probably
trivia along the way, I can certainly I think I can manage a couple of tricks.
no. This gives me an idea, Matthew, that apart from talking about testing, we should probably try some kind of a pop quiz at times and ask them these questions. Do you know which province has a 30 minutes offset and is still a
Yeah.
part of Canada and something like that?
Yep.
And
Yep.
then ask them, okay, who was the guest at my show who was from that time zone? So make it a little more interesting.
I like it. I like that idea. Yeah. So a couple of
Well,
fun facts about Newfoundland. So Newfoundland was the last province to join Confederation. It joined after World War II. Prior to that, it was technically its own country. It was
oh,
under British rule, but it was its own colony, it was its own nation. It had a prime minister and everything. And also that Cape Spear, which is it's part of the Avalon Peninsula, which is part of the island of Newfoundland, is the most easterly point of land in North America. You literally, if you go any more east, you are in water. You can't find another piece of land. The next piece of land that's east is European.
yeah. So you would be probably very close to Greenland, maybe, if you go
Yeah,
further
well,
east.
relatively speaking, yeah, we're pretty close. And it's funny because Newfoundland is the sort of first time zone in which people actually reside when
Yeah.
the day starts. So when the new year starts, or like when the new year comes around, Newfoundland is the first place that it happens. Every place else is after us.
Yeah. So well, that's quite an interesting trivia. Now, for a lot of people, will do some digging up and at least have some geography lessons after this. Well, so let's start talking about our favorite subject, testing.
Yes.
Well, so I have known you for a while now, and I have found the conversations with you very engaging. And I know that you have quite some experience in the world of testing. But I was curious to know what has been your source of inspiration for being, if I may use the word, addicted to testing for all these years.
Yeah, I think you have to be a little bit addicted to it to stick with it in some respects. It's not an easy job. Anyone can learn, or a lot of people anyways, can learn to be a tester. But I think there's a certain mindset that it tends to appeal to, and you have to be, yeah, it has to drive you. There has to be something about it that drives you. For me, I'm just innately curious. I actually did a talk about, this was about a year and a half ago, in Kitchener-Waterloo, and it was called In Praise of the Generalist. And one of the things that I talked a lot about was, because I see a lot of things in tech publications and posts on LinkedIn and things like that about specialization, people wanting to specialize, especially in testing. You hear a lot about specializing in automation or software developer and test and things like that. And, that's not a bad thing in and of itself. But I felt that the generalists of the world needed a little bit of a boost, because I consider myself a generalist. I'm an eternal dabbler. I dabble in everything. I've probably played with just about every kind of technology at one time or another. I probably never spent a huge amount of time on a lot of them, so I probably wouldn't be able to do more than basic stuff. But I'm just innately curious, and I'm like, oh, hey, new shiny toy. And so I think that's what kind of keeps me coming back to testing, is there's always new and interesting problems to solve. And not only that, but there are also a lot of real challenges that a lot of software companies face. And it's something that I think I can help with. And one of the big drivers for me too is I think ultimately I feel like my purpose is to help people. And so pretty much everything I do stems from that in some way. I'm trying to help somebody. I may not be doing a very good job of it sometimes, but I'm always trying to help. And I think that those two things sort of go together. Like, it's that curiosity of like, hey, I wonder what happens if I do this. I admit taking a certain amount of pleasure in like throwing weird things into form fields and watching the developers squirm a little.
Well, that's quite interesting. Now, one of the things that you mentioned is about being a generalist. Now, you know what? I have been making a lot of confessions in all these TesterSpeak episodes. I don't know why the speakers make me do these confessions, or the guests confessions. So here's one more. I am also more of a generalist than being a specialist. Okay. You can use the term jack of all trades,
Yes.
but I would not say master of none. I am a master of certain things. Okay.
Yeah.
There are specific things that I can do pretty well within the testing. There are a lot of things that are there as a part of testing. Now, one of the fears that I have had over the years is the fear of overgeneralization of the craft of testing.
Yeah.
So that is why probably the companies around the world have, adopted an approach towards creating specializations. Okay, especially after we see, automation coming into the fore, and then we start talking about AI and things like that. Well, so what's your take on that? I mean, how do you see that happening?
Well, so I think that yes, I think that's a general trend in technology. Is there's always a push towards further and further specialization, and something that I talked about in my talk, because I didn't want people to think I was bashing the specialists at all. Both types serve a role and serve a purpose. The specialist is the person who, when you've got the weirdest problem in the world and you cannot solve this, no matter how much you try and how many people you talk to, you go to the specialist. It's a little bit like the medical field. You go to your family doctor, and your family doctor went to the exact same school that that other doctors went to. They just took a more general approach. They looked at a lot of different things. Whereas, you've got a brain surgeon, you've got a neurologist, somebody like that, they've chosen to focus on that thing. They're not the person you want to go see when you've pulled a muscle and you need something to deal with it. They're the person you see when you got something in your head you need removed. So there's a really valuable place for both of those things. I think that there is a risk of overgeneralization. Absolutely. I do have to watch myself a little bit. I have to kind of put a cap on myself a little bit to say, okay, that looks really, really cool, and I really want to do that. And for me, it's a time factor. Usually, I don't have time to dig into all the cool things I want to dig into. So I usually just, the way I feed that is, I follow blogs. My Feedly is just full of stuff, and I don't always read it all. A lot of the time, like, for example, I have a whole section on security, because at one point I was actually seriously considering a career change. I was getting a little burned out on the testing side of things, and I wasn't getting the same oomph out of it. And I was like, maybe it's time for a change. I've done security training before, and I really enjoyed it. I really enjoy security. I think there's a lot of cool stuff going on there. And I've been volunteering with a local security conference for just 9 years, I think now, almost 10. And it's something that was where I got my first one of my first opportunities to do a speaking engagement was with B-Side St. John's. And that spun off into other speaking engagements that I've done. And so, but I ultimately decided that security is really interesting. And if I was going to focus on that, that would be fine. But I can't do both. I can't learn enough about security to become a security focused tester or to become a pen tester or something like that. I don't have time for that. I've got a family, and I've got work, and I've got a life. I've got a life outside testing too. And I think that's something that's really important. That I think, and this was something that we've talked about before. I have a ton of respect for the folks that do the weekend testing, for example, and things like that. Like the people who live and breathe testing, they're essential to our industry. We can't do without them. But I realized sort of early on, I realized I wasn't that person. That I am not the guy who's going to go Monday to Friday working on testing and then go and spend his weekend doing testing too. And not because I look down on it, but literally because if I do too much of that, then I'm going to burn out from it. I'm going to get so focused that it's going to be harder for me to defocus. And I find a lot of the things that I do outside of testing have started to kind of really inform my testing and inform my thinking, and also inform how I interact with people. Because I think, as Jerry Weinberg said, every problem is a people problem. And I think that's really true, that a lot of this stuff, a lot of the issues that we run into with testing, yeah, we run into technical issues all the time. That's what we're here for. But the people problems are far more interesting and far more challenging than any technical problem, certainly that I've encountered. I think, for example, I had a really good conversation with, I run a testing community to practice at my current employer. And I've got developers and I've got my testers on there, and I've even got the development team leads on it, which is great. Not everybody attends every meeting, but people come out to it, which is really nice. And we had a really good discussion. We reviewed a couple weeks ago. I told them to review Ken Kaner's paper on qualitative and quantitative measurement. I'll try and dig up the link for you. It's a good paper. It's a solid paper, and we were discussing things about measurements and metrics and things.
I'm sorry, I think I've read it, but it'll be good if you could share the link to the larger community. So
absolutely,
yeah.
And it was a great discussion, and the developers had some really good ideas, and it also gave me an opportunity to talk a little bit about. One person asked the question, if you're at a place where, you're presenting the idea of, measurements and metrics maybe aren't necessarily things that are telling you something, they're just telling you that you need to ask some questions. But you can't necessarily directly infer something from, say, a spike in your escape rate. You can't say, oh, that's because of this. You need to go and ask questions. That just tells you you may need to go and ask some questions and see what's going on. And so we started kind of talking about that, and one of the questions was, if you're in a place where that's not the norm, which is, I suspect, a lot of places, if not most of them, how do you handle that? How do you get buy-in? And the answer is that you got to present the idea, and you have to present it in a way that presents it to them as, what you're doing right now is not serving you. You make it about them. You make it about serving them. You are trying to help them, and it's not a manipulation thing or anything like that. It's literally just thinking about it from their perspective. Like that's what we're here to do. We're here to help. We're here to do things to help the business, to help our fellow technical professionals. And so if you frame it that way, people tend to be a lot more receptive to it. So the way I sort of presented it was, if you're going to try and pitch something like this somewhere, you need to think about it from the perspective of the other person. What do they need? And you need to listen. You need to be able to listen to them and sort of hear what their problems are and where their pain points are.
Right. So I think that's quite interesting. Now, when you talk about trying to solve problems, trying to listen to people, try to understand what the pain points of people are, have you got it wrong anytime? You know what I mean, right? So
yes.
so you try to do something, and then you not quite there. Something has gone wrong. So have you got it wrong sometime?
So I think I've been lucky in that I don't think I've gotten it wrong in the sense of I've presented the wrong idea. I think I've been pretty lucky in that I think of most of the time I've presented, if not the best idea, certainly a good idea to start with. And that's always where I start. I don't worry about trying to get it right the first time completely. I'm just like, let's try something and see if we can get better than where we are now. But I think there's been plenty of times where I have misunderstood what they needed, either because I was daft and didn't understand what they were trying to say, which, that's just life sometimes. And I think especially earlier in my career, I obviously less experience, that can be a problem, and it's hard to listen. Listening is a skill that you have to refine, and it takes time and effort, and it takes a few bruises too. You have to mess up a few times before you really start to figure it out. I think it's kind of like learning to ride a bike. You fall off a few times, you're going to get some scraped elbows and scraped knees and stuff like that, but you'll eventually figure out the balance. And I think it's the same with presenting these ideas and learning how to listen and how to pick up on people's pain points. But I think there have been also times where I've missed because what the person is saying isn't necessarily what they actually need. They're not necessarily really, they're not performing a lot of metacognition. They're not thinking about it from that perspective of like really digging deep into the problem of like, what is the root of this problem? You know, they just want a quick fix. And I'm not good at that. I'm not good at giving people quick fixes. At least not for complicated problems. You know, quick fixes to complicated problems usually end up causing more problems.
I can totally relate to that. I've been in situations. Now, the reason why I ask you if you've got it wrong sometime is because you mentioned something very interesting, and you quoted Jerry Weinberg, where he said, problems, most of the problems we deal with are people problems, and with people, you know, in the craft that we are testing, okay, we have to, let me use the word, deal with a lot of people. I'm talking about developers. We are talking about, architects, business analysts, product owners, stakeholders, almost everybody. So I'll just take a simple example. So if you're working on, say, something like a test strategy, now people would say, hey, you're the tester, you're responsible for the test strategy. But people will not realize, to make a good test strategy, you have got to collaborate with all these people that I've mentioned. So that is where, you sometimes may run into some kind of people problems, where the developer would say, oh, you are the tester, you take care of it. Why are you coming and talking to me? So I've got that from okay, I've got that from a developer once, and I'm like, oh, then I had to tell him that no, you are developing the product, okay, so your opinion matters to me. Okay, I am looking to find out if there are any risks that we can foresee. So why don't we sit together and then do that? So that initial reaction that I get, sometimes, and for young testers, it may be daunting if they start working and if somebody says like that, hey, what have I got to do? And they will not be able to, deal with that situation. And that's where they get a feeling that, oh, have we got it wrong? And that is the reason why I asked you that question. Get it wrong sometimes, because initially I used to wonder. Am I doing the right thing? Am I supposed to be talking to him? I would just walk up to my test lead and say, hey, you deal with him. He's like, no, you deal with him. You're going to be testing, so you pair up with him and do the stuff. So we've learned all that. So that is the reason why I asked.
So I was a little bit spoiled in that my very first testing job, my actual testing, was with, I guess you could say, a very close student of Michael Bolton's. I was working in Toronto at the time, and Adam White took me on as a tester. I had no testing background. I had been working tech support. And I'd been working on a product that was kind of similar to what they wanted to test, and they needed a tester. So he brought me in for an interview. It was one of the most interesting interviews I've ever had, actually, still. And I've worked at a few places, so it was an interesting experience. And so I was already kind of given that idea that you talk to whoever you have to, and you find out what you need to know. You find out, you go and ask these people, what do you think are the risks? They may or may not be right, but at least you have their insight. You have that possibility of understanding their perspective. And I think that's sort of where I think, because a lot of testers, at least a lot of the testers that I know, do tend to have that sort of generalist mindset of, doing a little bit of everything. I think for me, that's partly where I've been successful, is bridging those gaps. So bridging the gap between the technical side and the business side and things like that. Not quite the BA role exactly, but kind of. But being able to provide sort of that common hub a little bit, that's worked really well for me. And I think it's partly just because of the kind of person I am. I like to think I'm not a jerk. I'm a pretty easygoing guy. You know, I forget where I heard the phrase, strong opinions loosely held. And that's sort of where I come from is, you know, I have strong opinions, and most of them are loosely held in that if you can make a reasonably good argument against what I think, then yeah, okay, maybe I'm going to reevaluate what I think. And I think that a lot of people don't expect that, and I think they kind of appreciate it. So that tends to make it easier for me, between the sort of early exposure to the idea of you just go and talk to whoever you need to talk to, because you got to get the job done. And that plus just my natural sort of tendency towards, I'm not a necessarily an extrovert. I'm actually surprisingly introverted. But I think that my tendency is more so to, even though I'm a little bit introverted, to make those connections, because I like people. Generally speaking, I mean, you know, you're going to run into jerks just about everywhere you go. Although I will say that and this is not because they are my current employer, but my current employer, I have not encountered a single jerk in the entire place yet. It's great. I'm actually really enjoying it.
I'm sure they're listening.
I hope so. I hope they like it. I hope they find this video useful and entertaining. I just hope they don't meme me. Turn me into a meme.
Well, so what I wanted to know from you is now that you've spoken about, you know, generalization, we've spoken about, you know, kind of people we deal with and the stuff that we like to do. Now, you seen the whole 9 yards of testing, if I may say so. You know, from being a tester to now being a manager and things like that. So when somebody is getting new into the field of testing, I mean, he's absolutely new, full of energy, probably doesn't know what more could I do. So what would be your advice to a person who's starting fresh with his testing career?
That's a good question. I think the biggest thing is to look for community. Don't stick to just one, because especially early on in your career, you may find that a community fits you for a while and then doesn't anymore, or that you think a community fits you and then you realize, no, this isn't actually working for me. Finding community, I think, is essential, especially if you're early on, because you know, most places, you know, you don't have a huge amount of testers. I don't think I've been at a company where there's been more than, you know, half a dozen. And I've been at a couple of bigger companies, but most of them have been smaller. And so your local community in terms of your employer can be kind of small. So it's valuable to go outside that and try and find a community that matches your style. You know, there's obviously there's a community for those of us who've taken some of the rapid software testing training of one breed or another. But there's, you know, there's a pretty big community of people with the Association for Software Testing, which I've helped out with some of the BBST courses that they run, which are I took them and I really enjoyed them. That's why I became an instructor, why I did the instructor course, because I just thought these are great courses. If I'm teaching them, I get to basically redo the course for free all the time. It's great. I get to relearn all this material and refresh myself. Plus, I get to help people, you know, so it's all good. The other big thing, though, is when you're starting out is invest in yourself. Invest time, invest money. That was something that I have to admit, I did not take as seriously as I should have, in that I had lots of things I wanted to do and lots of things I wanted to learn. But I had this, and I cannot for the life of me figure out why I thought this. Foolishness of youth, I guess. That, if my employer wasn't going to help me get the training, then, oh, well, I'm not going to do it. I really just wish I could go back and just give myself a little tap upside the head and be like, dude, just go and do it. But and it doesn't have to even be money necessarily. Like, I mean, yes, there are courses and a lot of them cost money. Books aren't free usually, but you can get pretty good deals on books. You might be able to find somebody who is willing to give you, like, sponsor you for getting into a class or something like that. And that's actually something I would like to see a little more of, is a little more of our community maybe doing some kind of scholarships or something like that for doing classes and things like that for people getting into the field. Because I think especially the courses, and I don't mean like a Udemy course or something like that, because not that there's anything wrong with those, but I think the interactive classes, whether it's a live interactive or whether like the RST things, or like the BBST classes that AST runs, where they're interactive, but they're asynchronous. So you're messaging through forums and things like that, or on Slack. Like, Ministry of Testing has a really cool Slack community. I have to admit, I've kind of neglected them lately, but I've often gotten a lot of really interesting ideas out of that. I'd like to see more opportunities for junior testers to take on some of these courses, and get deeper into some of these communities so that they can have an opportunity to figure out where they want to take their career. Because a lot of the time at the beginning of your career or in the early years of your career, you don't really know exactly what you want to do. I mean, and I think, most testers that I've met fell into testing by accident. I don't know anybody who was like, I finished high school, I'm going to be a software tester. And it's not a bad thing necessarily. It's just the nature of the beast. And, so it's one of those things where it's like, because there's no specific career paths, like, it can become difficult to do that kind of longer term career planning until you've done some things and until you've been exposed to a few things. It's something that, so one of the side things I kind of do, that I've been working towards, is a Bachelor of Education in Adult Education. And I actually did a curriculum course, so writing a curriculum. And I started doing some research for my final project, which was I was writing a 2-year college curriculum, like not a full-on degree, but like a diploma kind of program that would cover basically all the basic stuff that you would need to know to take on pretty much any junior software testing position. And I was trying to, part of the development of curriculum, especially when you are dealing with public institutions, which a lot of them in Canada are, is that you are going to be dealing with government funding. So you need to be able to make the case to government in a lot of cases, or to the institution, who then has to make the case to government, that there is a use for this course. And in a lot of cases, you want to make a case around at least in Canada, the colleges are different than the universities. The community colleges are focused on, they used to be kind of trade school focused, but they've become a little more technical, and they've branched out, and some of them even do degrees, but their focus is still very sort of practical, get you into a job kind of focus. It's not academic focused so much. And so I wanted to build a program that would do that. And I realized when I started doing some research into employment numbers that there are no employment numbers for testers. Like, if you go to the US government or the Canadian government, maybe some other government does have that, but at least the Canadian and US governments, as far as I can tell, don't track that as a separate field. There's plenty of like different ones for programmers, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But the challenge is that how do you show a value of having a testing program in your college if you can't say, well, these are the employment numbers, this is where we project things are going to go, or where the Bureau of Employment or the Department of Education is, or whatever they're planning and whatever they're thinking is going to be the next big demand. If you don't have numbers to say, okay, we're going to see a need for 500 testers over the next 10 years in Canada. If you don't have that, then it's harder to make that case to government to say, hey, fund my 2-year degree, or my 2-year diploma rather. So it's a really interesting problem in that, yeah, like the early testers are sort of kind of adrift a little bit, or they can be anyways. Unless they're at a place where there's a good program in place. Like if you've got somebody, I was really lucky. Like I said, I worked for Adam White, and he was a big proponent of training and things like that, and that made a big difference for me. I did the RST course with Michael, geez, about 10 years ago, and and I also did some of the BBST stuff, but I also was doing reading and things like that. Just magazine stuff and blog posts and stuff like that. Sorry, I know that was a bit of a long-winded answer.
No, that's pretty good, because you've, in your response to my question, have actually sort of highlighted a big problem. Okay, and that is the lack of a place for testing in formal education systems.
Yes.
Okay, and this is something global. Okay, you don't have university degrees for testing. You don't have, or testing is somehow, even if somebody, so I can, because because my education has happened in India, so I can give you tell you about the system there. So I did my bachelor's in electronics and communication engineering. But if I look at the computer science or the information technology engineering, and if I look at their syllabus, it talks about testing as maybe one small section in one semester. That's all. Okay, out of the 8 semesters that you have to attend your college, and you've got just one small section, and that's also an elective, which is like optional. Some people may choose to do so, some people may not. And I was speaking to a lot of students, I said, what do you want to do next? Oh, I want to be a developer. What's wrong with being a tester? Well, nah, that's pretty easy. Anybody can do testing, or you don't get paid well, or
that part may be true.
Yes, I know, I know, but then if you want to fix the mindset of the community worldwide, you've got to fix it from that level, where you've got to tell them that, okay, there is definitely a relevance. There are, I don't know, at least thousands and thousands of testers who are, professional testers who do testing for their livelihood. Okay, so it is a profession. It is a very noble profession. Okay, and we are helping a lot of people in terms of making the quality of the software or whatever we are testing. We are making it better. Okay, we are in a lot of cases we've even helped in saving lives. So there is no reason why we should be looked down upon. But you've highlighted that big problem, and I think we are going to talk more on this subject in the coming days, because I want to seriously. So there's something running in my head at the moment, but as a part of the test chat community, I'm going to start these interactions so that we can take it out to the larger community and then build
Mhm.
sort of a kind of a pressure to somehow get it into the education system, at least somewhere,
Yeah.
at least in some country. We should make a start and then take it further. Yeah, you wanted to
Yeah.
add something, I guess.
Yeah, well, it's funny because you're right. As far as I've seen, there is no academic or educational track anywhere really that focuses on testing. Um, the only thing I'm really aware of is what Kem Kaner was doing in Florida. And I'm not even entirely sure what's going on there these days. I honestly haven't looked, but I haven't heard a lot from him, so I'm not sure what's going on. I mean, I don't know him personally, so that doesn't mean anything. But I just haven't noticed any activity on his blog very much lately. But I think he was kind of the only person I've ever seen doing what I would consider to be legitimate academic work on testing. Not that the work that other people like Michael and James Bach are doing isn't legitimate, but it's not within the structure of academia, and that's okay. Like what they're doing is very important, and I think there's an absolute ton of value. But it's it's sort of, I guess, the equivalent of a cowboy coder, the guy who just writes however he wants to and does whatever he wants to, and but he gets results. Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
However, the cowboy coder is not how you build professional uh, uh, sort of inroads, I guess. And yeah, I know James has often suggested that it's up to each of us to do that, and that's great. And I to a certain extent I agree, except for the fact that we're not all James Bach. We're not all Michael Bolton. We do not all have the force of their personalities. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean that they are very, very strong people and very, very powerful personalities, and they're very good at communicating their ideas, and like they're at the top of the game basically. Not all of us can be James or Michael. And so for the rest of us mere mortals, what do? And so I think that being able to start getting that academic thing going a little bit more helps those of us who aren't the trailblazers necessarily, or the real, true blue trailblazers, but it also gives us an opportunity to look at testing in a different way. So going back to what I was talking about before with Kem's paper on measurement, qualitative and quantitative measurement. That sort of paper is a great way to logically break down a problem and walk through a problem and think about it. Even if you don't present a solution, even just presenting the problem starts people thinking about it, and starts people talking about it, and starts getting, well, how could we do this? Could we do that to try and solve it? And I mean, I don't have a degree. I have a diploma from a community college. That was how I started my education. I was on track to go to university, and I chose not to, because at the time I was like, well, I don't have the math for computer science, and all the other things I've taken are English and history, and I didn't want to be a teacher at the time. I didn't want to teach English or history. But that being said, those topics are endlessly fascinating to me, and I still dig them. I'm still an armchair historian. It's great. But I think that having that sort of, I guess you could almost say, gravitas behind the industry of, we have people from legitimate, recognized academic institutions doing programs and saying, you know what, even if it isn't a bachelor, I have a diploma in testing, and it's from a recognized institution, and there's credibility behind that. And yeah, okay, you're leaning on that a bit, and that's fair. Like, it's a crutch. That's a fair argument, but it's a place to start. And I think it's not a bad place to start, I don't think. I think it's just a case of knowing knowing how to tackle the problem, knowing how to tackle the problem of how do we get in there, how do we work our way into academia. And it's an interesting problem, and it's a problem I've given some thought to, and I'm probably going to give more thought to as time goes on, because I'm not finished my degree yet, so I've got lots of time to think about it.
Well, yeah, that's a very interesting response. Well, what I also really liked in your previous response is the fact that you underlined the importance of investing in yourself in terms of money and time, and this applies not just to people who are getting fresh into the industry, but it applies for those of us who have been there for some time now.
Yes.
It doesn't matter how much experience you have. So in my opinion, I feel that when you start investing in yourself, it is you who is benefiting the most out of it, because you are getting better at the craft. And if you are getting better at the craft, you will obviously, be able to help others much better. So, so there is the selfish reason, if I may say so, of investing. And then the other point that you made about the communities, about having scholarship programs or sponsorship programs. Now I want to tell people via this particular video that has been one of the goals that we've had for the test chat community. Now, something that we've done as so basically the test chat group was formed to give a voice to people. Okay, testers, in my experience, have struggled always to find a place where they could go and talk, or raise concerns. And we said, okay, so let's get started. Let's start talking about it. And one of the rules that we sort of set was that nobody will judge you for what you say. Okay, so don't be under the fear of being judged, because that's when people don't really say a lot. But we want to hear. Okay, we want to hear because everybody has a unique story to tell, and everybody teaches us something. That's what at least I believe. Okay, and I was telling somebody, in fact, in the very previous episode of TesterSpeak, I told the guest that it doesn't matter to me if the person has got 1 month experience or 6 months experience or 6 years experience or 16 years of experience. Each person will teach me something I know for sure. So I look for an opportunity to learn from each one of them. And so thereby, when we started this community, and now we are more than 1,000 people in that community, it's growing in number. And of course, we are trying to motivate people in different ways. One of the things that we said initially was that we will have some sort of a sponsorship program. And ever since we started the community, we've had 4 conferences to which we were able to sponsor people. Okay. And how we are doing that, well, that's a secret. We don't want to
absolutely
we don't want to divulge that, but it gives us happiness. It gives me personal satisfaction when somebody goes to a conference and then comes back and says, thank you, Brijesh, I learned a lot. Because that is my goal, that if somebody goes there, comes back and says, and the reason why I'm saying this is not because I'm trying to boast myself, but I'm kind of, this is a plea to the other communities that we need to rise to the occasion and be able to inspire a lot of people in sort of getting what they want to get. That's my only message. And thank you for making that point, Matthew. I mean, I just wanted to underscore that point a little bit. So sorry for my blabbering, but
oh, not at all. No, not at all. You know what? I think that's I had noticed the conference thing, and I think that's great. I think that's awesome. I'm a big proponent of conferences. I have never actually been to a testing conference, believe it or not. Most of the conferences that I've been to have been security conferences, because that's how I sort of got my feet wet with doing speaking, because I was sort of trying to see where sort of the general software testing community could kind of bridge to security to try and us help them, but them help us too. So I kind of wanted to see where I could find, like I found from my conversations, I mean, that they have a lot of the same kinds of problems. Like security in general faces a lot of the same kinds of challenges that testing does. They have, because it's sort of, you know, much like us, where it's like, well, how do you provide value? Well, you know, you can't really prove that we provide value. You know, we make sure that your value doesn't decrease, or we try to anyway. You know, and it's the same with security. Well, how do you know if all that money you're throwing down there is working? And it's like, well, we haven't had a breach yet. And if you have a breach, does that mean that you wasted that money? Maybe not, because maybe you would have had a breach sooner. But they get into a lot of the same kinds of challenges. And you know, even things like one of the things that I discovered, and I was actually going to do a talk this year, and I didn't get a chance to run my experiment because I was changing jobs, and I knew I was going to be too busy, and then the pandemic happened, so the conference got canceled anyways. But basically, I wanted to run an experiment where I would try using session-based testing as a documentation model for pen testing, because one of the challenges that I heard about from a lot of people in the security community is, especially with junior pen testers, because they're hiring them in droves, and they probably don't have a ton of documentation experience. They're not great at writing up the reports, and the reports are like, most of the pen testers that I talked to said, you know, report writing is more of what we do than anything else. It's kind of like us in bug writing, you know, or session sheet writing. And it was one of those things where I was like, you know, I wonder if this approach could be helpful. And so, but yeah, conferences, I've picked up a ton of great stuff from conferences, just from the security side of things. Like I met a really, really interesting researcher. She is at, what's the name of the university? Temple University in Philadelphia, I think. Pennsylvania somewhere, I think. Anyways, it's in the States. And she's doing a really interesting course that she takes half liberal arts students and half computer science students and throws them into this open source intelligence class. And it's all about the manipulation side of things, and not in a bad way, but like for one of her experiments that she presented on last year, actually at B-Side St. John's, was this idea of the EULA, the end user license agreement, and how nobody reads them. And so what they did was they had a thing where they had the students go out and they were saying, oh, well, you can have this free thing. All you have to do is sign this agreement. And people would sign it, and they didn't know that they were agreeing to, there was a clause in it that like they had to sing a silly song, or, you know, nothing really bad, but just to sort of make the point, and just to start kind of get some data on how many people are actually how many people actually look at these things and actually spend the time to read them. And I know I don't. I don't have that time. I mean, I could probably understand about 70-80%, because, you know, I have kind of an odd brain. Legalese is difficult to parse, but not that difficult, so I can make my way through it. But they're just so damn long. Nobody reads them. And that was kind of an interesting result out of her research. And I met her through another security conference that I was speaking at. And, you know, like I've met a lot of really interesting people who have taught me a ton. You know, it's not just the talks. You know, another person that I met introduced me to all sorts of interesting stuff around database fuzzing. I've never learned, I never even heard of it. I was like, what? Database fuzzing? What's that? And she introduced me to this, and I'm like, just like blew my mind, you know? and it's a great testing tool. And I'm like, how did I not know about this? So, I think I'm a big proponent of conferences as a good way if you're, and a lot of the time they may be cheaper than classes. They're also oftentimes they're going to be maybe a little bit less of a time commitment. And oftentimes they're a bit bigger in terms of the social side of things, which can be a challenge. Like I said, I'm an introvert, so initially getting into a conference is like, it's like jumping into cold water. But I think it's really important that whatever you have when you're starting out, and like you said, when you're further along in your career too, you need to find ways to learn. And another good way to learn is teaching.
Yes.
I've learned a ton from teaching. I taught a course about 2 years ago. It was a 4-month intensive course teaching in a indigenous community. There's a consultancy here in Canada called Plato, and they're doing really cool things. They've got I won't get into it because it's a whole thing, but it's a really cool idea. I highly recommend looking it up. They're doing some really cool stuff on the social side, but also their testing program is good. And I actually went to New Brunswick for 4 months to teach. And I learned a ton from people who literally, some of them had only, like, they used computers, but like they weren't IT people. They weren't, nerds like me, and I learned a ton. It got me thinking about testing from a whole different perspective.
Right.
And I think that's something that I think some people don't want to teach because they don't maybe some people just don't want to teach, and I get that. That's fair. Um, but I think a lot of people don't teach because they don't think they have anything to say or anything to add. And I don't think that's true. I think there's a lot of people out there uh, who can help, who can teach and teach somebody new something new. And you don't have to teach a course. You don't have to go off to another province for 4 months to teach in another community. You don't have to spend even. You don't even have to do a month-long thing with AST. You don't have to be a consultant like James or Michael and run a 3-day class and charge a reasonable but large sum of money. You don't have to do any of those things. You can teach the guy at the desk next to you, or like I've been running this testing community of practice. First time I've ever done it. And it's been a great opportunity for me to put my ideas out there. I've also obviously it's not the Matt show. Or at least I try not to let it be the Matt show. I am the person with the most testing experience at the company, so oftentimes it becomes mine. But I try to push it out to the group as well. And we've especially lately done a lot of, here's a piece of material, go and watch it, in a couple of weeks come back and we'll discuss it.
Yeah.
And that's a type of teaching too. Even if you're not directly teaching them, you're giving them exposure to something that they might not have found on their own, because it might not have occurred to them. They might not know where to find these things. Developers don't know who Kem Kaner is.
Right.
They might not. They probably think Michael Bolton is the guy who plays the saxophone, and they probably don't have a clue who James Bach is, or any of these guys for that matter. Any of these people who teach courses and are well known, they don't know who any of these people are, and they wouldn't think to look it up. They wouldn't know where to start necessarily, and that's not their fault. They just have never had exposure to it. And
Right.
so you could be that person who gives them a new tool in their toolbox as a developer. I mean, how cool is that? I always love it when somebody's like, hey, that's cool, thanks. I often warn developers when I started a place that one of my favorite testing tools is James released a tool ages ago called PearlClip, and it has this function called allcars, and it dumps the entire ASCII string, or a set of ASCII characters, including the non-printables, to your clipboard. And you just start pasting that into fields, and it's a really super basic test, but it's a great way to check and see if people are sanitizing their form fields. Things like that, or that their database, that their queries are solid, and things like that. So, but it teaches them. It teaches them something. Like if I warn them about that, that teaches them something. So, you don't have to run a course necessarily to teach. You just need to share what you know, because just because you know it doesn't mean that somebody else does.
Right. So, you mentioned about the developers not knowing some of these names. Well, interestingly, within the testing community as well, in a lot of geographies, because of the dominance of one particular approach towards or one particular school of thought, people do not know about other people. For example, if I just take the example of India, for example, there is predominant ISTQB, how should I say, dominance. Okay, it's like everybody knows what ISTQB is. But if you ask them about the context-driven school of testing, context-driven testing, you know about it. So they might not know about James or Michael or Kepkane or and all the cool stuff that they do. So this is there within the industry itself. Now the thing is, it's always a good idea, like you said, to teach people or to share this knowledge. And you don't have to be like, okay, now for me, okay, I'll give you again my example. I had not done an RST course ever. Okay, for many years, I never did one. Till about about 8-9 years of experience, when I had about 8-9 years of experience, that's when I took up the ISTQB exam. And I did it because everybody else was doing it, and bias, it was bandwagon bias. I joined the bandwagon. I did that. Then I realized that probably I'm the only one who's thinking about applying whatever I learned during the whole certification process into my daily work. Everybody else is not bothered. They're like, okay, we have a certificate. We've answered 40 multiple choice questions. This certificate, we can show that off to everybody else, and so nobody was
absolutely
in application. Now a few years later, Agile came in, and the whole Scrum thing and Scrum certification came in. And my question today is basically that if we have so many certified testers and so many certified Scrum masters, then why are testing and Agile the most misunderstood concepts? The word. Okay, so
yeah, that's a good question. I think personally, I think that it has to do with I think a lot of people are missing the point. So for example, with Agile, I like Agile. As a general rule, I like the Agile ideas because I go back to the manifesto. And I'm not some sort of purist that thinks, oh, you can only have the manifesto and that is the only document that matters. But I think that the ideas that are there are generally pretty solid. They certainly have, from my experience, have worked pretty well. It's humanist and that appeals to me because I like humanist stuff. I like things that consider people as more than just cogs in the machine. And so, but a lot of I think, and it's interesting because this kind of ties into what I was, the conversation I had earlier today with my community of practice, which is basically that you have to understand what the business is trying to get out of whatever activity, testing, development, whatever. Development has struggled with the metrics thing as long as we have, longer probably, because how many places have measured lines of code as a way of measuring developer productivity? Probably almost every shop has done that. That's been around for more than 10 years. Anybody who's done Agile knows that's, well, anybody who's done anything related to development, even if they haven't been a developer, knows that that's a useless metric. It's a line of code is not a standardized unit of measurement. You can't use it as a way to measure productivity. It can tell you things, or it can give you opportunities to ask questions like, why is our little web app that only generates a web page, why does it require 1 million lines of code? Maybe there's something wrong here. Maybe we need to look into this. But I think that the money makers, the ones who want to churn stuff out, get their hands on these things and they see an opportunity and they say, okay, hey, I can make this certified Scrum Master thing, or I can make this certified tester thing, and throw together an exam and make a few bucks off it. And I don't begrudge anybody trying to make a buck. We all got to do it. Unfortunately, that's the reality of our world. But it's disingenuous as far as I'm concerned. Now, that being said, I don't think that certification in and of itself is a bad thing. I think that when it's done right, it can be useful. It can be an indicator of at least some degree of skill. Going back to the security thing, there's an organization called Offensive Security, and they produce Kali Linux, among other things. And the other part of their business, though, the part that actually makes them money, is certifications. And one of their certifications is the Offensive Security Certified Professional, which is a really hard cert to get because it's not just a multiple choice exam. In fact, I don't think there's any multiple choice involved. You do a course, you have lab time, you do a class, and you have a list of things you need to do, and you use your lab time, and if you need more, you buy more. That's how they make their money. And then you do the exam, and it's 24 hours, and you have 24 hours to get in as many machines as you can, document as much as you can, and write up this report, and you have 24 hours to do it. But you have to actually do something. You're not just answering questions. You have to actually, and to be fair, it's a bit of a simulated environment because it's their lab, so they can set it up however they want. But it's still, there are still Windows machines, there are still Linux machines, there are still networking devices. So it's at least an approximation of what a pen tester might see in the real world.
Right.
So to me, those kinds of certifications can be very useful because they can at least tell you, okay, this person can at least do that kind of a grind. So they've got some ambition, and it can tell you, well, they probably know something because the pass percentage for that, I think, is like 70 or 80%. So you have to get a fairly good score on it to pass. So they probably are at least moderately skilled in some of the various things that pen testers do. So there is value in certification in that it's a shorthand for saying this person probably knows something. They may not be an expert, they may not be the person, but they have at least a base level of knowledge about stuff. But the problem is that those kinds of exams are hard to run, they're hard to administer, they're expensive to administer, and they're time consuming to administer. AST runs into this all the time. The exams, I've graded exams, and it's hard work. It is hard work because you've got you have to think about it. And it's kind of not an exact science. It's all rubric based. So to a certain extent, it's based on the examiner's opinion, basically. Not their opinion, but I guess you could say informed opinion, because they are trained, they've been through the classes, so they know the material, or they know it well enough to have passed anyway. And they've done the instructor course, and in a lot of cases, especially at the beginning, your work is usually checked by somebody, so you have a little bit of a check and balance in place. So those things are I think are useful. They're a good opportunity, but I think the sort of certification mills of I was on track to do my MCSE back in far too long ago to talk about. And it was funny actually because I was taking a class for it. This was actually before I went to college. I was taking a year off and sort of reassessing my direction. And I was like, well, I don't want to just sit around, and I don't just want to work at a part-time job. I want to learn something. And there was an opportunity, and it was relatively inexpensive. So I was like, hey, I'll do that. And it was an eye opener. I was very lucky that I had early exposure to the idea that, okay, here's what you need to know for the exam. Here's what you need to know for real life when you're doing this stuff. Because the guy who was teaching it was a actual professional IT person who had worked in the field, who knew this stuff, and was like, okay, this is what the book says. That's what's going to be on the exam. This is what you need to know to really do this. And it doesn't always match up. What the exam says and what real life says doesn't always match up, especially with the multiple choice or even interactive like models that they have sometimes. It doesn't match with reality all the time. And so I knew that basically it was much like you doing the ISTQB. It's a way in the door, or you feel like it's the only way in the door in some cases, especially when you're starting out, or if you're between jobs. I mean, having been there a couple of times, it's something that you sort of consider as like, okay, well, am I getting blocked because I don't have those magic letters on my resume?
Yeah, because employers ask for it. Because some of the employers ask for it. Okay, even though it does not have any significance in your day-to-day work, they would still ask for it because they find it fancy. Now, I'm sorry I cut you short there, but here's something interesting that I wanted to share with you. I remember I ran a poll on Test Chat about knowledge of the Agile Manifesto and how people work. And what the interesting part is, 41% people say that we are agile, but we do not refer or rely on the manifesto. Well, that's yeah, they probably never looked at the manifesto. Okay, and then there is 22% people who say I don't know what the Agile Manifesto is. Okay, so
that seems like a much more reasonable answer.
Yeah, so it is like a staggering 63% people out of 100% who hear about Agile, but they either don't know what the manifesto is or think that they don't need to know what the Agile Manifesto is. So this was a trivia that I wanted to share with you. Well,
that's really interesting.
We did not realize that.
I think I'm actually more interested in that first number, the people who think they don't need to know the manifesto to do Agile or to work in an Agile way. I don't really like the way I've gotten into the bad habit of saying do Agile, which is, I don't like it. It's not good. It's not a good way to say it, but for me at least, I've seen the distinction of uppercase A Agile and lowercase a Agile. And the uppercase A Agile is like the Scrum trademark or Kanban trademark. Like the people who are doing things because they've got the person who came in and they paid them a lot of money to certify that they are doing things a certain way. And then the sort of small A Agile people are the people who are like, okay, I'm going to use the various bits and pieces of that are out there from Scrum and Kanban and whatever, story pointing and such. And I'm just going to use what works, And actually, one of my previous employers, my team was basically doing what I would consider small A agile, in that we weren't really doing Scrum. We weren't really doing Kanban. We were kind of doing a little bit of both, but mostly we were just self-organizing and finding what worked for us at the time and doing it. Which is, I kind of feel like that was sort of the essence of Agile, is basically find the thing that works for the people involved in the project and then do that. And then when that stops working, do something else and find whatever tools you need to facilitate that. But the people come first, and that's, I feel like that was probably one of the most agile teams I've ever been on, because it was just sort of like, well, we're gonna meet we had scheduled meetings, like we had a retrospective and we had a demo, and then we would have our sprint planning. And so I mean, to a certain extent, we were following uppercase agile, but we didn't do it mindlessly. It wasn't a matter of doing it for the sake of doing the ceremony to say we did the ceremony. We were doing it because it worked for us, because it was useful for us to be able to review what we'd done over the last couple of weeks with ourselves, also with the rest of our team, because in that particular situation, the developers and myself were here in St. John's, and the rest of the team, like the project manager and the designers and everybody else, were in Kitchener-Waterloo, which is in Ontario. So they were about 3 hours away. So so that was a little bit of a situation where I think Agile actually facilitated that to actually work. Like, we couldn't have done it any other way, because otherwise they would never know what we were working on until they got it at the end. And so we kind of had to do that, but it was a good opportunity, and we always tried to leverage that opportunity to provide the presentation to other people, but also to give ourselves a chance for introspection a little bit. That's, I think, to me, the big thing about Agile is, it's all about the people. It's all about the people involved in the project, and everything sort of stems from that. And you figure out what works, and you don't necessarily throw away all the documentation. You just don't write like sheafs and sheafs and sheafs of documents before you even start the project.
Right.
You do something and you try it and you iterate on that. And to me, I mean, that kind of model always made sense to me. But when I've been lucky, I haven't worked at any places that have been like where they've used Agile in a way that was sort of following the formalities, but not actually doing any of the actual Agile stuff, like actually being, I've never worked in a place that was Scrumfall, for example, where they've used waterfall, but they're using boards and user stories and stuff, but it still ends up being waterfall. Most of the places I've been at that use Agile, I've been doing Agile-ish things, for the most part.
Well, I have worked on the contrary, I have worked in a lot of places which has been exactly the opposite of what you said. Well, we did not realize that we've been speaking for an hour and a half now already.
Oh my! So we have.
Yeah. So yeah. This is probably going to be a very long TesterSpeak episode, and people are going to need to sit with popcorn and
maybe break it into 2 parts or something.
Yeah, so no, they will watch it, at their leisure maybe. But then this has been a great conversation. The final thing that I would like to know from you is what does Matthew like doing when he's not testing or not doing anything with security or anything like that? What does he do?
What don't I do? See, when I say I'm a generalist, I really am. Like I tinker and dabble in all sorts of things, but I think so I'm an avid home cook. I am borderline obsessed with food. I actually very seriously considered becoming a chef when I was in high school. Until I
Wow.
spent a day. I arranged to have a day shadowing in a professional kitchen and realized, nope, not for me. I'll stick to my home kitchen. Thank you very much. Um, but I love to cook. I love to eat. I'm always interested in learning about new food and new types of food. I'm on a bit of a Vietnamese kick at the moment. I got a new cookbook for Father's Day, and I've been playing around with some of those. That's a lot of fun. There's no Vietnamese restaurants in St. John's, and it makes me very sad. Before COVID, I've been practicing Aikido for about 11 years now. I started not long after I started testing, actually. It's a fascinating art.
Yeah.
Fun fact, Jerry Weinberg practiced, although I never got a chance to meet him and talk to him about it before he passed, sadly. But it's a fascinating art. I feel like it's a really good art for people with a scientific bend to their brains, because it's kind of like endless research into body mechanics and physics. And it's a lot of fun, and it's fun to just like throw people around and get thrown around and all that stuff. It's a lot of fun. I really enjoy it, but it's a good art too, because there's not, you're not trying to kick the crap out of people.
Yeah.
It's not a competitive art. It's a cooperative art, which I like.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, those are sort of my main things. I do a fair bit of gardening at home. Haven't been doing as much at the house this year, but my father-in-law has a summer home, and I grew a really nice crop of garlic this year. I'm really happy.
No. Okay. Well, okay. So that was a really interesting conversation. I have also got a few ideas of maybe doing some sort of collaboration sessions with you for
Yeah, sure.
the test chat community, especially with ideas around pen testing, and I want to
Hmm.
take you a little further into your idea of trying to do a little bit of session-based testing and combining a little bit of security element in that. The one that you
Hmm.
wanted to run. Maybe it's something that you could do in a workshop mode, and
Hmm.
where
That's an
people can
interesting
get.
idea.
Yeah. So we can mm, collaborate on that one. I will get in touch with you for that, and let's see how far we can take this idea out to the community. And
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm sure the folks in the community will be delighted to, in the tester community, will be delighted to hear about it. So it's been really interesting talking to you. We never realized that we've been talking for so long. Suddenly, I
Yeah.
look at the clock. It's 6 minutes past 1 a.m. for
Oh
me.
my
So
goodness. I should let
so
you go so you can get some sleep.
yeah, it's been a really good conversation with you, and I always wanted to have this hearty chat with you because, like I said in the introduction, that I've followed a lot of your work and through your comments and through all the discussions, and then our interaction, which was very brief in the RSTM class, but then I saw that there is a lot of potential in at least talking about your skills. I wanted to know. So now this conversation leaves me a little wiser than I was about an hour and a half ago. So thank you so much for that.
You're
Uh,
very welcome. Thank you for having me on, and thank you for doing the this whole series. I've watched a few of the videos, and I've gotten a lot out of it, and I've really enjoyed the test chat community. I joined after you told us about it in RSTM, and it's been really good for helping me sharpen my focus. So I really appreciate that, and there's been some really great discussions there, and I would definitely encourage people to go there, and if they want to work on their testing skills in terms of their sort of metacognitive stuff, especially, that's the place to go. If you want to test your ideas, it's the place to go.
yeah. Thank you so much for that shout out. I wish you a wonderful rest of the evening, and I'm going to head straight into the bed.
That sounds
We
like a good
will,
plan.
yeah, we will catch up soon. Thank you so much for your time this evening.
Thanks. See you later.
Bye bye. Yeah, bye.